kindly grace the dais. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Palki Sharma is an award-winning journalist and managing editor at Firstpost, widely respected for her global strategic lens and ground reporting. We welcome you, madam. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, it is now my privilege to invite our esteemed panelists to the stage. Mr. Peter Knop, former director, International Center for Counterterrorism, The Hague. Let's welcome him with a huge round of applause. Welcome, sir. He's an expert in counterterrorism, human security, and conflict prevention, and today he's going to be speaking on redefining global war on terrorism. May I now take the privilege of inviting to this stage Ms. Karis White, founder and executive director of Signal Group Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, Signal Group Israel, a leading authority on China's strategic role and global governance. Warm welcome, madam. Today, she will be speaking on escalation dominance, setting strategic benchmark. May I now take the privilege of requesting Professor Hideaki Shinoda from the Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome him, Professor Hideaki Shinoda. He's a prominent scholar of peace building and global governance, and today he's going to talk to us on deterring terrorism in South Asia. Warm welcome to you, sir. And ladies and gentlemen, our panelist, Shri Alok Joshi, I have the privilege of calling him to the stage. Let's welcome him, Shri Alok Joshi, the chairman of National Security Advisory Board. A very warm welcome to you, sir. He is respected for decades of strategic and intelligence leadership, and he's going to be talking to us on new power dynamics, relevance of international rules-based order, and India's strategic responses. Thank you very much. That is our stellar panel, ladies and gentlemen, and it is now over to our moderator, Ms. Palki Sharma.
Delighted to join all of you at the Chanakya Defence Dialogue organized by Clause and to be speaking before such an exceptional gathering of military and strategic leaders. It's an honor to be here. I'll set the stage for this conversation and then take it forward. And let me do the cliche and start with a question. What defines power in the 21st century? Many would say it's a cocktail of factors like your armed forces, a technological edge, unity at the home front, and an enduring cultural impact. And you'd be right, all of these factors are important, but there's something else that is often unacknowledged or overlooked, and that is the exercise of these attributes. You may have a strong military, but how do you use it? You may have a technological edge, but how do you deploy it? You may have defeated your enemy, but how are you handling that victory? I think these factors also shape a country's power and perception, and this is where Operation Sindoor stands out. Enough has been said about the tactical brilliance of what happened in May, whether it's the pinpoint accuracy of our BrahMos missiles, or the relentless defense mounted by our air defense guns, or the rapid airstrikes on the terror camps. And the satellite images showed how lethal and precise our forces were. But this session today, ladies and gentlemen, goes beyond the tactics of warfare. It addresses the political and strategic impact of Operation Sindoor. And I'll break it down into three different aspects. The first is the strategic grammar set by Operation Sindoor. Think of it like fighting a disease. When you fight a disease, you have two options. You either address the symptoms or you address the illness. In our world today, increasingly people and countries are addressing the symptoms. So airstrikes are performative, not targeted. Naval deployments are symbolic, not strategic. And military acquisitions are a message, not a mission. In peacetime, such an approach may work, but when you're constantly dealing with a terror state at your border, it won't work. And if it wasn't clear already, the symptom in this case is terrorism, but the disease is the powers across the border that support and sponsor this mindless violence. Operation Sindoor targeted the symptom and the disease. It shattered the feeling of invincibility and safety that Pakistan's terror infrastructure long cherished. The smoldering Lashkar headquarters in Murid was proof of that. So was the flattened Jaish headquarters in Bahawalpur. And with those strikes, India spelled out a new strategic grammar that went beyond neutralizing the henchmen. It was a policy that targets the men who give the orders, as well as the men who carry out those orders. As this operation continued, multiple Pakistani military bases were also hit, again expanding on the new grammar. And it was probably summed up best in the declaration that came after the fighting ended, when we told the world that henceforth an act of terror will be seen as an act of war. I think it marked a monumental shift in our approach to fighting terrorism, because this was also an acknowledgement that this fight is not just ideological, it is political. We are not just facing radicalized madmen, we are facing ruthless scheming generals on the other side of the border. So any deterrence policy must target them as well. Unless the planners and the godfathers feel threatened, feel vulnerable, you will not win this war. And that's what India did during Operation Sindoor. We imposed costs on the Pakistani state, as well as on the terrorists. As far as policies go, it was a bold one, I think. It's also a sign of a confident and clear-minded country. You cannot declare such a policy unless there is utter political conviction and clarity. You cannot declare such a policy unless there's military superiority and prowess. India has both, and it is not shy to flaunt it. So that's the first aspect, strategic grammar. The second one is strategic clarity. Why are you launching a military operation? What are your core objectives? And how far are you willing to escalate? These things sound like routine planning for a major operation. But it appears that they're anything but routine, because look at the world around us. Wars start, but never end. Deadlines are set, but never met. And goals are defined, but constantly changed. The result is endless wars with casualties that run into tens of thousands. Look at the war in Ukraine. It does not resemble a 21st century high-tech conflict. It reminds you of the world wars from the previous century. Close, bloody, ruthless fighting. Or look at what happened in Gaza between 2023 and October this year. When the fighting started, the world largely supported Israel. But as the war dragged on, as the casualty count rose, that sentiment shifted. I think this is where India's Operation Sindoor succeeded, because right from the outset, the goals were clear and they were unambiguously explained in public. India's actions were described, and I'm quoting, as measured, non-escalatory, proportionate, and responsible. The goal was to punish and deter terrorists and their backers. The goal was not to spread fear and chaos. It was not to shake up the regime in Islamabad, and it was certainly not optics. And for the general public, it may be hard to understand. We in the media were covering what happened. And people wrote to us all the time, and most of them had one question. If we were winning, if we had air superiority, why did we stop? That's what people asked us. Why did we not make moves into Pakistani territory? I think this is the answer. Because it was never a part of the mission objective. We've all grown up watching Hollywood movies, and they make you think that you go into a war and then things develop on their own. Maybe they do, but I think professional militaries stick to the mission, especially when the mission is going well. And that clarity gave India an edge. Our military controlled the escalation ladder. They also landed the final blows that forced Pakistan into seeking a ceasefire. So to put it simply, India showed restraint and clarity. I know these qualities are not appreciated these days. We live in an Instagram world. People want theater and rhetoric and threats that can be cut into reels with dramatic background music. But this is warfare, and this is the real world. So when lives are at stake, clarity and restraint matter. It's what separates a professional and powerful military from a performative one. The third aspect I want to focus on today is strategic autonomy. India did not ask or inform anyone before launching the strikes, and we did not end it because someone told us to. I cannot overstate the importance of this. As Indians, we often take strategic autonomy for granted. We think, what is the big deal about making our own decisions? Because that's what we've always seen. It's par for the course. But again, let me turn to the conflicts of our times. Why did Israel agree to end the war in Gaza? Not because the people of Israel voted for the war to end, certainly not because the Netanyahu government wanted the war to end. They ended because the Americans forced them to end the war. Apparently, it was Donald Trump's son-in-law and his golf buddy who designed the peace deal. Imagine that, 2 years of fighting, and this is how it ends. If you look at Ukraine, it's a similar story. Their president was humiliated in front of the whole world by the US leadership. And now they're being forced to take a peace deal, even though they may not like it, even though that deal may reduce Ukraine to a rump state. This is why strategic autonomy matters in our world, because you cannot count on the global community to protect your interests. Forget protecting your interests. You cannot count on them to truly comprehend your interests. And that leaves you with two options. You either leave your fate to your powerful so-called friends, or you take matters in your own hands. India has always chosen the second option. Operation Sindoor was a perfect exercise of that strategic autonomy. And it's important to not confuse it with self-sufficiency or Atmanirbharta. It's a part of strategic autonomy, but not a prerequisite for it. You can use Russian air defenses and French Rafales and still be the master of your own fate. It's not the cards, they say. It's how you play those cards. Our armed forces used both indigenous and foreign weapons. We briefed our partners, but after the fighting. We upheld international norms, but never put them above national interest. These are the hallmarks of strategic autonomy. Could we have done something better? I think the sense is that we won the war, but we may have lost the story. Because in this day and age, in this post-truth world, you also need to ace your messaging. And this is where the media, traditional and social, comes in. It's a strategic tool, and it's something that we have to work on. So to recap, India has displayed three crucial traits during this conflict with Pakistan: a bold strategic grammar, strategic clarity, and strategic autonomy. And we did it in the true spirit of our country. This is where I must commend the armed forces and their professionalism, because it's easy to lose your way in high-pressure situations. It is easy to get carried away by your successes. It is much harder to remain poised, graceful, and professional. In those few tense days, Pakistan's military represented the worst of their people. We saw arrogance, boasts, and misinformation. In contrast, we saw the best of India in our armed forces: inclusive, professional, and restrained. Which brings me back to the original point that I made. Power is not just about hard numbers and missiles. It is about how you exercise those abilities. India has always used its power to protect its people and its neighbors, never for expansionism, never for boasts, and never to hurt innocent lives. And that distinction is what makes India a deserving world power. Jai Hind. I didn't say thank you because I'm not done yet. So we have an August panel here. I've divided this conversation into 4 rounds. In the first round, we'll talk about what sort of signal we sent to the world through Operation Sindoor. And let me start with you, Peter Knoop. The strikes were precise and limited. Like I said, India targeted not just the terror infrastructure, but also the backers, both political and military. From where you sit, would you say that this marks the end of the old reactive global war on terror and the rise of a more decisive state-led model?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Can I reflect on the global war on terror first? Can I go back to where that all started?
Sure.
Like more than 2 decades ago. We go back to 9/11, if that's okay with you. 9/11 happened, and there was a decisive moment. You're 26th of November. And most of us in Europe, in the United States, we know exactly where we were, what happened that day, and what your reflections were on 9/11. For one, I said, on 9/11, and those who were with me, my family remembers, I said, the world will never be the same again. This will change the planet. And it did. 9/11 changed the planet. And that was the start of the global war on terror. Now, you talked about performativity. Now, 9/11 was performativity. If you want an example of performativity, 9/11 was, as much as 26/11. And that brought out fear. Fear is important. Anxiety is important. A couple of people, a very small group of people, hijacked a religion and made it look as if that religion was responsible for the violence. And that introduced fear for a much larger group of people in the world than only that small group. That reflects on a much larger element in our global society. And that is still with us, that fear, and it has increased over the last 20, 25 years. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. It's in China, it's in Russia, it's in Europe, it's in the United States, it's everywhere. So the fear has got hold of us. Now, what the world does when it feels anxiety and fear is securitization. Securitization is your reflex, it's your impulse. And we've seen enormous rise of securitization globally over the last 25 years. It's everywhere. Our financial transactions are securitized. Our systems are securitized. We are being surveyed 24/7. The security architecture has increased enormously. So securitization over the last 25 years, and somebody mentioned artificial intelligence as the next step in our securitization. If artificial intelligence gets hold of our securitization architecture, it's going to be extremely scary. So fear, securitization, and then over the last 25 years, we've seen quite a number of failures of the global war on terror. Did we talk about the failures? Did we draw lessons from the failures? I haven't seen them. I think it's time for us to look at the failures and be serious about the failures. And that brings me to the issue of definitions. Because we talk about terrorism, but we all know that there's no internationally agreed definition of terrorism. There's 250 different definitions that we do not agree. So we know how to fight it, but we don't know what it is, which is a bit awkward. But over the last 25 years, we've introduced more terms, and you use them. Radicals, radicalization, extremism, violent extremism. Have we even started the conversation about what that is? We haven't defined any of that. So we let alone the fact that we don't know what terrorism is, but we've introduced in the last 25 years, while we were securitizing it, and while we were frightened, we introduced more terms that we haven't even started the conversation about what it is. Extremism, radicalization, radicals. Now that brings me to the war. Now I need to be very cautious because I'm talking in front of a lot of uniforms here, and I'm not in the uniform, but I think I know what a war is. Traditionally, a war is two warring parties in uniforms with arms fighting one another. It's a male thing. And we know who the combatant is. He's got a uniform, he's got an arm. Traditionally, that is what it is, isn't it? And we know, how to behave in that fight. We males, we know, what to do, what not to do. Women, children were excluded. And then colonialism came. Colonialism changed the way we fight wars because we simply killed everybody. In the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in Latin America. We call it genocide these days. Women and children all of a sudden became involved. It was no longer limited to males, combatants. We introduced that. And then World War II came, you mentioned it. World War II was the summit of genocide. Systematic killing out of religious reasons. And then we said, no more. Let's stop this thing. You talked about it, the rules. A rules-based order, we said. So 1945, after the Second War, we decided that no more. We want something else. We want to regulate this. And we went back to combatants, males, and we understood how to combat each other. And then on 9/11, the terrorists said, that's not our rules. We don't obey to your rules. It's none of our business. It's your rules. We don't obey to it. Al-Qaeda said, no, it's not our rules. And then Bush did something really awkward. He said, let's go along with the terrorists. Let's have a war with the terrorists. So those who do not obey the war, we follow them. We decide not to follow the rules. Or do we defend the rules? Are we defending our rules and our values? Or do we go along with those who do not? I think that's a very fundamental question that hasn't been answered because there's two groups of, thinkers. Some people think that, because the terrorists do not follow the rules, we shouldn't either. But there's others, like myself, who think if they violate our rules, we should defend our rules and live up to our rules. That's what I think counterterrorism is all about. Now, I'm not sure if I answered your question.
That's fine.
It's some of
quite an answer,
my reflections.
It's not every day that I'm in a conversation where we are cracking genocide jokes. So quite something. Karisweet, India hit the terror infrastructure. We sent a message and we kept escalation firmly under control. How rare is that combination and what does it say about India's grip on the escalation ladder?
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the Chanakya Defence Dialogue for the return invitation, the outstanding organization. It's an honor to sit with this esteemed panel and to be back with you again. And if you'll excuse me, with all due respect, you all saw my response to the comment about Israel being forced to end the war. It is not true that we were forced to end the war. It is not true that our government and our people did not want to end the war. That is deeply, deeply disturbing to hear. We wanted the war to end as soon as the hostages were taken. And we wanted the war to end when the hostages were going to be returned. And that is when the war ended, when the US administration found the strength and fortitude to support our effort in getting our hostages back. And I'm very happy to tell you that all of the live hostages were returned, and now all but one of the dead hostages were returned. So that is why our war came to an end. In response to the subject of escalation dominance, my area, as you may have read if you looked at the program, is China. And I was given permission to address escalation dominance in this context. It usually refers to kinetic conflict, and you saw in the video at the beginning, escalation dominance, boom, boom, boom. But there is another focus, which is the critical role of escalation dominance in non-kinetic contexts, regarding a country that presents the biggest challenge to both Israel and India. For all the hazards posed by Pakistan, DPRK, and Iran, it's China that challenges our strategic independence. When Xi Jinping speaks of a community with a shared future, he envisions China overseeing that community and not through war. Despite the rhetoric, Beijing prefers to avoid war, in part due to its problematic current domestic economy, its declining exports, and what we've heard a great deal about, the military purges. On the other hand, China enjoys a growing global status through diplomacy and supply chain asymmetries that I believe will cause Beijing to continue to avoid war unless pushed by an extreme exogenous event like Taiwan declaring independence. Moreover, two recent drawn-out wars reinforce Beijing's caution, the same wars that you mentioned, Ukraine and Gaza. Ukraine showed China how even a nuclear superpower can be dragged into a grinding war of attrition with staggering casualties. That gave Beijing pause. Gaza demonstrated something else. Even a highly trained military with advanced technology and very committed to minimizing civilian casualties faced devastating urban warfare. Taipei is urban. Beijing cannot afford Gaza-like images coming from Taiwan. But in the absence of war, it doesn't mean that there's an absence of escalation, and escalation dominance also operates in non-kinetic arenas such as technology, diplomacy, supply chains, influence operations, and regional alignment. And that is exactly where we face a challenge in Israel's relationship with China. In the arena of escalation dominance, it's about setting strategic benchmarks, but those that do not test the threshold that triggers confrontation. We see this from China in the South China Sea and on India's borders. In Israel, it's primarily about diplomatic pressure. A striking example occurred very recently when a member of our parliament visited Taiwan. The Chinese embassy warned, and I quote, "If he does not rein in at the brink of the precipice, he will fall and be shattered to pieces." And further, he said, he will delude himself and in ways that can harm China's core interests, he will pay a price. This was textbook, non-kinetic, rhetorical escalation. It backfired. It strengthened Israel's resolve, triggered political backlash, and deepened cross-party interest in diversifying Israel's partnerships across Asia. This is escalation dominance in action. Israel applies it in technology and investment. We have set oversight of foreign investment into critical sectors. In diplomacy, we respond more directly now when China aligns with Iran and when it promotes anti-Israel narratives through TikTok, for example, which fortunately is not in India. It also does it through regional strategy, strengthening alliances to enhance Israel's strategic autonomy. So we asked, where would alliances be most effective? And the answer was very clear: in the Indo-Pacific. China can tolerate friction with Europe, but it is deeply sensitive to strengthen ties with countries that matter most to Beijing in what it considers its backyard: India, Japan, South Korea, UAE. Israel's ties are now growing with all of these countries. A very effective tool in escalation dominance in the non-kinetic arena can also be the trilateral framework. We saw how the Japan, South Korea, US Camp David convening caused more concern in Beijing than the Quad or AUKUS. For Israel, trilaterals that bridge the Indo-Pacific and Middle East, linking Indian Ocean strategy, Gulf logistics, and Israeli innovation, sends a powerful message. This aligns very naturally with IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. IMEC creates a trusted connectivity architecture that is by all the partners, for all the partners, advancing the interest of all the partners. Very different from the Belt and Road Initiative that is led by one country. And another example is the joint India-Israel defense production. We heard earlier about the importance of India becoming self-reliant. Israel also needs to pursue that. In 2024, the Israel Aircraft Industry, IAI, and had established here in India a subsidiary called ASI under Make in India, 97% Indian staff. And just this past Sunday, your defense minister signed a $3.7 billion deal connected to IAI and ASI. Due to the longstanding Israeli defense controls, this kind of cooperation can never happen with China. In conclusion, areas of Israel's escalation dominance vis-à-vis China can only ever be non-kinetic. But this applies to many countries. And by remaining aware and alert, this can also be constructive, stabilizing, and above all, strategic. Managed well, it ensures reliance on ourselves, and this is critical in an era of intensifying great power competition. Through deep partnerships, trilateral frameworks, policy dialogues, and regional connectivity initiatives, middle powers like Israel and partners like India can build the architecture that ensures strength, flexibility, sovereignty that will maintain our chosen way of life. Thank you.
Dr. Shinoda, I'll come back to Operation Sindoor. Pakistan always believed that its terror machinery was too deep, too dispersed, and too protected to be touched. Would you say that what happened in May, what the Indian Armed Forces did in the month of May, shattered that myth once and for all? The question? Yeah. So there was a belief, or so it seems, that Pakistan's establishment believed that they were secure behind their borders. But what India did with Operation Sindoor, do you think that busted the myth and we did not distinguish between the perpetrators of terror and the sponsors of terror?
Well, that's a crucial question. But first of all, I'd like to thank all of you organizers for inviting me from Japan to this important occasion, Chanakya Defence Dialogue. India is such an important country for a long period of time for Japan, and even more so in the future. So I'm so much privileged and so much delightful to be here. At the beginning, I was told by the organizers that we could speak for 5 minutes and so on. So I prepared the PowerPoint slide to indicate some of the points in a graphic manner. Thank you very much. But I tried to respond to your question as much as possible. Things are very complicated, to put it very simply. We are talking about terrorism. By the way, I'm coming from the community of peace operations, studies, conflict analysis. I'm not a military expert, as you may know very well. And then I do not necessarily handle terrorism as part of military affairs, usually. However, I have quite often occasions in which I share the views, insight into counter-terrorist activities, simply because contemporary international peace operations need to handle counter-terrorist activities. In fact, de facto counter-terrorism activities and so on. Throughout the world, especially in Africa, over Somalia, Al-Shabaab, in the Sahel, Jenim, and so on, Al-Qaeda affiliated networks, and IS affiliated networks from the Sahel region in Western Africa, stretching through the Horn of Africa to the Middle East. In this context, we discuss peace operations in terms of peace building in order to bring about long-term peace against terrorist activities by preventing and counter anti-rebel operations, as well as prevention of multilateral confrontations between sovereign states. Systematically speaking, these layers, confrontation between two states, confrontation among various factions in the countries, and confrontations in a group of governments against terrorist networks and so on. All these are systematically, intellectually different layers. But of course, in fact, they are highly interconnected, interlinked. I deal with Africa very well, quite frankly, because of my background of international peace operations. And they have a different context compared to South Asia. But if we put forward these general observations in a complex world of the 21st century, we need to differentiate the different layers in order to perceive the complexity of the world. However, at the same time, simultaneously, we need to accept the fact that they are interlinked with each other. I'm dealing with operational affairs, normative affairs in this way by publishing let's say, the English book, Partnership Peace Operations, Confronting Theories of Geopolitics, and so on. And I was given these tasks before the conference. In my 5 minutes, I cannot handle all this. And then I tried to highlight the role of narrative shaping and deterrence, long-term deterrence through stabilization. That is my role, if my understanding is correct. Responding to your question, one, attempts, prior to that, I need to say that, let's say in the context of African issues, international peace operations, UN, regional organizations, collaborating with bilateral partners, they are handling many anti-terrorist activities, counter-terrorist activities, countermeasures against what they usually call violent extremism. And ranging from the headquarters function of the United Nations, OCT, or agencies like UNDP, UNODC. Well, Japan has been engaged with the so-called maritime security in terms of anti-piracy operations. And there are terrorist networks, syndicates between Al-Shabaab, the Houthi, and the Middle East, and so on. We cannot handle ambitious operations, but we are detecting these issues anyway. And then by international organizations, it tends to put forward these issues as part of youth, something like youth empowerment, as part of a bigger picture of development of issue aid. Believing that terrorist activities are arising out of the frustration, grievances among especially the youth, which is true, although it may not be the entire picture. And which is true to some extent in Africa and South Asia, but somewhat in different manners. And so we need to analyze these issues carefully by sharing the same knowledge, same observations, while observing the differences. Whatever the differences are, the similarities are, little coordination among military and civilian operations, among the experts across different regions, like South. Seldom we see rare opportunities in which we see dialogues between South Asian experts, Middle Eastern experts, and African experts. While recognizing the differences, sharing similarities in order to develop our own strategies, coherent strategies, or distinctive strategies. Having said that, what we are discussing at this moment very seriously, of course, very much a lot of issues, but let's highlight 3 points. Counter-narrative measures, that is very much irrelevant to this occasion, I believe. Operation Sindoor is discussed in the context of global war on terror, but redefining global war on terror. That's a very much grand narrative. And as Madam Chair said, that it's been successful to a great extent, however, may not be very much perfectly successful. We all of us, human beings, it's very difficult to achieve something in 100% perfect manner. So we prioritize our own main goal while handling some other issues without falling into the trap of other narratives. We've been discussing very grand narrative, let's say since the end of the Cold War, the victory of liberal democracy, clash of civilizations, unipolar world, and now we are talking about multipolar world. The so-called global war on terror started in a very much operational manner since September the 11th, 2001. And since then, it's been still effective, but it's been somewhat challenged by other narratives like neo-colonialism, globalist conspiracy, even the deep state conspiracy. All these are functioning against the narrative of global war on terror. And then while I said that we may continue to redefine the global war on terror in a constructive manner, but still, that's one thing. But we need to be very careful not to fall into the trap of other narratives at the same time. Positive advancement and negative care, both are necessary in the world of counter-narrative measures. Counter misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, that is very much important topic because so many items of disinformation and hate speech. So we need to really protect and respect the factual matters, the effective manners of presentation of facts. But the facts are not very pure. Sometimes facts are checked against the norms. Facts are contextualized in the framework of international humanitarian law against the goal narratives. So number one, number two are highly connected. So that's very complex, but we need to handle. With the equipment of knowledge about effective narratives in the Sahel and South Asia and so on. We are very much discussing technical issues, of course, AI used by Al-Shabaab and some other terrorist groups to seek financial resources and recruit some more human resources and so on, extend trade networks and so on. We are belonging to the community of anti-technical terrorist networks, Tech Against Terrorism, and GIFT. We are constantly watching these issues by belonging in the community of these issues. I finished the topic. So having said that, the implications are clear. The narratives are multi-layered, and we prioritize and advance the most truthful and, quite frankly, strategically advantageous narrative in a reasonable, commonsensical manner. But we never assume that we can prevail as a narrator of one single narrative in the world in the 21st century. We must accept that there are some other narratives in the world. So let's not fall into the trap of other narratives, looking after these other narratives while keeping the facts and advancing our own narrative. That requires a lot of challenges, but the 21st century reality is so complex that we need to fix the strategic goal and then take care of negative aspects and so on. I'm sorry for answering your question in a bit in an abstract manner, but I think that the implications are all very clear, I think.
Now, you don't have to say sorry. I think at this point, this conversation is like the YouTube comment section. We're all doing our own thing. Sure. So, Alok, I'll ask you a question on Operation Sindoor, but you can choose to talk about whatever you want. India acted because global institutions did not. I mean, this terror threat has persisted, and we've raised it over the years. Do you think Operation Sindoor also exposed how outdated the so-called rules-based order is?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
Did Operation Sindoor expose how outdated global systems are in the so-called rules-based order? It wouldn't have come to this had the world taken the threat emanating from Pakistan seriously in time.
Yes, I think one of the defining moments of Operation Sindoor and the decisions that were taken with regard to that is that despite, I would say, the hang of nuclear threat that was bandied around by our adversary, despite that, the escalation ladder was within our control. And that was largely because we adhered till now with the norms of, I would say, response that was expected from a sovereign country. So to that extent, I think the rules of international engagement, as they have developed in the last, I would say, 2 decades, post 9/11, they have been adapted by us in our own way and, put out into action. So I would say the most defining part of Operation Sindoor was to take those decisions despite the threat of nuclear blackmail. I don't know whether it answers your...
Right. Peter Knoop, terrorists today do not live in caves. They live in encrypted chats, in crypto wallets, in drone garages, in deepfake videos. Which of these is reshaping the threat the fastest, and are countries and systems equipped to deal with it?
Can I go back to your earlier the earlier question because I think it's a very that's the crucial question.
Yes.
We set the rules and the way we would behave ourselves after the Second World War, because we said no more. We said we're not going to relive another world war. We're not going to do that again. So we set new set of rules.
The West, you mean? We,
the world, United Nations. Yes.
But those rules are not working for everyone.
No. And then what happened after 9/11 is that some actors in the world said, okay, if they don't obey the rules, then why should we? So that, that sort of...
History did not begin at 9/11. Pakistani terror threat existed before 9/11, and that's something that India raised repeatedly.
Yes. But the global war on terror started on 9/11. So the disobedience of the international architecture started after 9/11. And then during the last 25 years, increasingly states, I think it should be set out in the open, states adopted terrorist operational methodologies. Increasingly. Pakistan is not the only one. So not only did we disobey the international architecture for security and the rules of war, but states invaded the space where terrorists went. So there is an increasing number of states that operationalize as if they were terrorist organizations. Now, how do you respond to that? That is your India dilemma. How do you respond to states that act as if they're terrorists? And Pakistan is not the only one, because states increasingly over the last 20 years, 25 years, realize that if you disobey the rules and adopt terrorist methodologies, that creates your strength. So and this is why the confusion between war and terrorism, because we keep on skipping from terrorism to war, terrorism, as if it's the same thing. And it's become the same thing because we disobey the international rules and regulations. So how do you respond to a world where it's no longer clear what is a state and what is a war and what is a terrorist organization? And that's your dilemma. That's the India dilemma, because your neighbors are disobeying the rules. Now, the fundamental, and I repeat myself, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but the fundamental question is now, do you want to do away with the international rules and regulations and the international architecture of how we compose ourselves? Or do you go along with those who destroy the values in the systems? That's the fundamental
Or
question.
a third one, you reform it and you make it work for everyone.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. But that is something that we should talk about in the international United Nations environment, not as an individual country. That is a global conversation. And if you make that into a global conversation, then I'm on your side. Yes.
Gary Sweet, your thoughts on this?
First of all, size matters. When you are big, you can do things that you cannot do when you're small. Size, it can be measured in economy, it can be measured in global reach, it can be measured in population. And we see terrorists, as you said, pretending to be states, states pretending to be terrorists. So, for example, we were confronted by what was supposed to be a state, a group of people pretending to be a state, but then acting as a terrorist. And then when we fought them like a state, we were criticized for the way we handled our war, because they were supposedly just terrorists and not a state. So the mix is so complex and so limited in every situation, so different. Sindoor was a very unique situation. We haven't seen that replicated anywhere. And another issue is the narrative itself. The narrative can be deterrence and the narrative can provoke. So we have seen the narrative coming out of Gaza and Hamas provoking global terror, provoking all kinds of aggression. So on the other side, we can see that when we look at a country like China, when China thought that Israel was no longer the regional military and intelligence superpower because of October 7, they wrote us off, big X, and fully sided with Iran. When we showed our military and intelligence prowess once again at the end of last year, when we carried out the pager beeper operation against Hezbollah, not only did we prevent potential nuclear war, because they had 150,000 missiles pointed at us, and we managed to neutralize that threat with no serious damage to anyone but the Hezbollah operators. So we did that. We bombed in a very complex military operation deep into a hole to kill Nasrallah, first identifying where he was, then military aircraft after military aircraft bombing down into the same narrow hole without hitting each other, totally successful. And we had the intelligence information to be able to kill Hania in the IRGC hotel in Iran. That caused, and no direct contact with China whatsoever. But China then recalculated its entire approach towards Israel. So what I'm saying is narrative and size and how you handle those, how you address whether or not it's a state or whether or not it is a state pretending to be a terrorist. These are the things that are going to define how you need to go forward, and it is a moving target.
Dr. Shinoda, India is building a tech-first deterrence model. But in this region, is technology enough, or do you also have to cross the border and deliver a punch for deterrence to actually hold?
Again, I'm not a military expert, so what you have said is correct, and I'm not in a position to make a more detailed judgment. In terms of Operation Sindoor, India made very precise operational targeting, and then as far as I know, it was successful. That's okay. But What I said, referring to what I said, Pakistan, quite, well, as a foreigner, it's a little bit courageous to name these countries. But let's be frank. Pakistan, well, we knew that Pakistan would resort to another type of narrative, like clash of civilizations, of course, and India, identifying both terrorist groups and the state of Pakistan without any distinction. Even if the state government is sponsoring it, it's also true that there are some different identities in terms of groups and the state itself. So it's a bit difficult to fix the relationship, no matter how much we differentiate them or identify them. There must be some more subtle manners of describing the relationship. But it was pretty much clear that Pakistan would bring the narrative that India has not made any distinction between them. And so while you redefine the global war on terror, you need to be very careful not to fall into the trap of these other kinds of narratives. I wouldn't say that India was not successful, but Pakistan tried to make a call to the United States to appeal to Donald Trump by utilizing these narratives. And then, to say the least, U.S., Pakistan have somewhat made the story more complex, not just a straightforward global war on terror. And so perhaps there is always a room for further improvements, and technology matters, but the technology must go with counter-narrative operations too. That's what I said. And then the technology is designed for the purpose of redefine the global war on terror, targeting really terrorist groups only. And then you need to identify the factual matters, appeals to the public, not only domestic society, but international audience too, by utilizing international norms and so on. Well, to say that this is easy and to do this is not easy, though there is always room for improvement. In that sense, we need to emphasize this type of understanding again and again. That's what I want to respond to you.
Yes, in this case, the technology that seems to have made a difference was cryptocurrency, the deal. Alok Joshi ji, we are in a gray zone world. You know, we talk about cyber attacks, drone strikes, radicalization, but the law is still black and white. Do you think that global systems are even equipped to deal with modern conflict?
That's a tough one, so to say. No, actually, I would say post 9/11, the consensus as to how terror has to be handled is yet to develop. And this is the challenge that we face. I mean, look at what happened in Iraq, for example. I mean, there was no mandate given by the UN, no mandate taken, no mandate sought, and still you had operations in Iraq. Similarly, you have, operations being conducted in other parts of the world without any recourse to any international sanction. I mean, sanctions is a very strong word, but approvals, so to say. So this is one of the challenges that we face, and we have faced kind of, worked out a modus vivendi in our own way, I would say, where, of course, as it was mentioned, that the narrative has to be very strong. When you are going in for such a retaliatory action, you have to have built up a narrative before that, and that has to be a very strong narrative. So, having said that, I think right now it is still very gray zone area where if you have to wait for international approvals or consensus, it's going to be very difficult. So you have to take, and this is where, your sovereign rights come into play. You can't keep on, waiting for approvals from the international community, and then go in for whatever needs to be done with your adversaries. Not to forget that it is since 1947 that we are facing proxy wars. I mean, it started with the Kabali invaders getting into J&K. And as we speak today, it's still on. So the point is, how long are you going to wait, and how long you're going to have repeated pushbacks on what your narrative is. But having said that, the continuing, I think the effort has to be to convince the world that, look, this is the problem that has been faced by this country over the last almost 70 years. So that is where I would like to put it.
Maybe they see it, but they don't want to sort of acknowledge it. And, that explains the difference when the war begins in Ukraine, it's an invasion, but in Iraq, it is bringing democracy and so on. Peter Knoop, why are we so shy of naming the perpetrators, the state sponsors of terror? Everyone knows who's doing it, who's behind it. So what is the world afraid of? And why not name, Dr. Shinoda took a while to finally say Pakistan. What is the hesitation?
I don't know.
You don't know?
One of the fundamental issues is what I mentioned earlier. It's the definition question.
Yes.
We don't know how to define. We do not agree on the world scale what terrorism is. Now, one of the fundamental points of difference and questions that is still floating in New York at the UN level is not so much what terrorism is, because in the sense that it's political violence and it's a political motivated form of killing people. That one is relatively easy. There's 250 different definitions of terrorism, and they all have in common that, it's a political, out of a political motive, you kill people, or at least you damage people's interest. The problem in finding a common definition for terrorism is the question, who is a terrorist? We know what it is, but we don't know who the terrorist is. Can a state be a terrorist? Yeah. According to you, yes. But go to New York and talk about this in the UN, then there is a disagreement on the question, can a state be a terrorist? And because we do not agree on that fundamental question, we're in a problem at the UN level to frame and claim that a state is a terrorist state. And that comes back to, that whole discussion about the responsibility to protect and all that, So it's a very complex discussion about, and part of the hesitance to shame a name, as you asked, is because we lack a definition for terrorism, and the fact that we now have introduced new terms like extremism, radicals, and all that without even starting a conversation about what that is, means that every state can frame anybody else an extremist because we haven't defined it. So states can start, doing whatever, and that is what happened after 9/11. That is what the introduction of the confusion of the war on terror has created. That confusion.
I'll let Carrie Sweet respond. She clearly does not agree.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but I think we have to take a step or a leap back. Why do we not have the same definition of terrorism, and what does it mean? You look at the United Nations, and I'm from Israel, and I will tell you, I'm very sensitive to that term. We have a phrase in Hebrew, shmum, meaning who cares? Why? Regarding the United Nations, because the United Nations has sanctioned Israel more times than every other country put together. What did we do? I mean, you talk about, if you want to go back into the historical issues, we have been facing terrorism also since the beginning of the founding of our country. India and Israel share that. We share so many, although you're huge and we are tiny, we share and can empathize with each other in so many challenges. And perhaps that is why you have stuck by us throughout the bad images of the Gaza war, and we were the most vocal supporters during the Operation Sindoor. But what I want to talk about is education. People are educated to hate. They're educated to fear. Fear is natural anyway. And when that is your motive force and you don't have exposure to the other, all these different cultures, you end up being very willing to believe the worst. And that leads to, I think, the source of different, you have different interests. And so to satisfy your interests, you're going to define terrorism to meet those interests. And if that is going to be the starting point, I don't see how the United Nations can provide any kind of useful framework. There has to be some kind of process. I mean, if we're seriously talking about change, people talk about a peace process for Israel. You know what is at the heart of that peace process? Ending the belief system of our neighbors, the Palestinians, that they should hate, fear, and want to destroy us. That is in their educational system. Go online, you can see it in the books. Once they no longer fear and hate us and believe that they should have all of the territory from the river to the sea, then we can have peace. If they believe in living side by side, I think probably in Pakistan it's similar. If they believed that the two sides could live in harmony and they did not fear each other or have antagonistic aims for each other, then peace is possible. That starts with education. If the UNESCO rules of peace and tolerance were a requirement for all countries, we would see serious positive changes. I can tell you that in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Morocco, all of these countries that have relations with Israel now, they changed their educational system in order to end the hate that they had propagated for decades.
I'll come to you, but education is tricky because we've just seen a terror plot busted in India with medical doctors involved. So I understand that education is very important and gives everyone a real shot at life, but sometimes it's not enough. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for bringing back the fear factor into the equation. I think that is, and I've said it earlier, I think the fear factor is extremely important because fear drives securitization. The unpleasant truth is that securitization, and I shouldn't be saying this in front of all these security people, but the unpleasant truth is that if securitization is the impulse and the how do you say that, the result of fear, then that can be counterproductive because the securitization doesn't necessarily lead to a reduction of fear. On the contrary, securitization may increase the fear and make problems worse. So it means that you need to go back to human security. And how do you introduce human security into the equation? As a result, as a response to fear. Now, how do you do that? That is complex, but it's something that we should be talking about, should think about. Fear is there. Yes, fear is important. Yes, it's a human sentiment that drives us in many respects. But securitization, more locks on the door, more barbed wire, more cameras, more security guards, is not going to take away the fear. It may even increase your fear. And that is counterproductive. Now, I know you're all working in that area, you're all working in that field, so it's complex to reflect on that, but it's important to reflect on it.
Right. Before we wrap, Alok Joshi, I have to ask you this. The US is recalibrating, China is being assertive, West Asia is redrawing the chessboard. We made a point on strategic autonomy with Operation Sindoor, but what can India do to ensure that it can keep expanding this autonomy without being drawn into someone else's sphere?
that is where strategic autonomy comes into play. I think we are very clear in our mind, what. And I'll put it a little differently. Geopolitics should not determine our response to terror. It's as bland or as sweeping a statement I can make. I mean, if you are going to define terror and terrorism on the basis of geopolitics, I think we are not going to be able to convince anyone as to why we are responding in the way we are. So that has to be, taken out of the equation. But coming back to, I think you mentioned about decision making in terms of other people's problems with the terrorism. If I'm getting the question right, is that what you were asking?
No, I'm trying to say that the world around us is becoming more complex. We cannot agree on a definition of terrorism. We are working with different partners and different allies on different things. And while we assert our strategic autonomy, how difficult or easy would it be going forward, given the way the world around us is changing?
I think it will largely depend on very strong bilateral relations with the countries which are facing similar problems. I think that is the foundational basis on which you can have multilateral arrangements working for you. But I very firmly believe it is the bilateral relationships which can, deliver the results.
Right. I think we're out of time, but thank you very much for being such a wonderful audience there and speakers. Thank you for being part of this.
Thank you very much to our chair and our eminent panelists. I request you to please stay back with us for a moment because we're going to take this opportunity to thank you very much. Let me invite Lieutenant General Rajiv Ghai once again. Sarvottam Yuddha Seva Medal, Uttam Yuddha Seva Medal, Ati Vishish Seva Medal, Sena Medal Bar, the Deputy Chief of Army Staff Strategy to kindly do the honors and begin by thanking our chair, Ms. Palki Sharma, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, madam, for navigating that compelling deliberation. Thank you so much. Let's have a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we go on to thank Mr. Peter Kanoop, former Director, International Center for Counterterrorism, The Hague. Ms. Karis White, Founder and Executive Director of Signal Group, Israel. Professor Hideaki Shinoda, Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. And Shri Alok Joshi, Chairman, National Security Advisory Board. We thank you so much, sir. We request you to stay back with us, sir, for a group photograph with the eminent panelists. May I request the eminent panelists to kindly step ahead of the dais, give us a photo opportunity. And ladies and gentlemen, from here, we're going to be proceeding for lunch. We're indeed very grateful to the eminent panelists once again for setting a strong strategic foundation for this dialogue. Thank you very much.